Fabulous. Well, good evening and welcome everybody to this webinar this evening where we're going to explore the issues of smoking, vaping, and the nicotine trap and nicotine freedom. And we're going to look upon lots of things. And joining me this evening, I'm really excited, is Dr. Krissie Ivings, who
Hello.
is not only a clinical psychologist and former senior NHS clinical psychologist, but also, I believe, did her dissertation for her doctorate in smoking cessation. Is that correct? Have I got that right?
Yes, that's right. Way back in 1998, I did a PhD comparing Alan Carr's kind of cognitive model with the standard NHS treatment for smoking cessation to try and establish what works best for who and what predicts cessation.
Fantastic. So we've got some real and then well, I want to dive into the history around that a little bit, why you chose that, because that's always interesting. And then also your interest, I think, resurfaced around this when you, I guess, took the training with us. I'm guessing that's what kicked off the resurfacing of interest.
Well, actually, you kicked my interest off
Oh,
because you interviewed me about why a clinical psychologist had come back into the world of hypnotherapy and then just kind of asked me a bit about my background. And I found myself talking about smoking and thought, yeah, I haven't thought about smoking for a long time. Um, and also, I had teenage children who had started vaping, and I've been furious about vaping for the whole history of vaping. I was aware when vaping, I was in the smoking world when vaping emerged and recognized immediately, as did quite a few others actually, that it was a disaster waiting to happen, that was enthusiastically embraced and remains being enthusiastically embraced by the great and the good and public health in a way that I find baffling, frankly. So if there is anyone here from public health, from the NHS, who promotes vaping as a smoking cessation aid, I think, I'd love to engage you in a discussion about that.
she promises not to name names of the people at the top of the profession who actually brought about our new world of vaping. So let's go back. So that's fantastic. We've got an interesting agenda. We're going to cover quite a lot of ground, and I hope you're going to come away with understanding a lot more about what's going on with nicotine and vaping, what works, what doesn't work, and some things to take away. And I think also just interesting when we're working with, for those working with smokers and vapors, what we can take away from that and apply. There's good lessons to learn there because they're quite tough cases, but there's ways to crack those cases that I think are really then tells us also how to work with other conditions, I think. So I think it's not just on this topic. We can spread a little bit wider. But let me find out. So what made you decide to do that doctorate back then?
I mean, back then I had been a smoker and started the course still a smoker and had, like many people, I think, read the Alan Carr book and thought that's something new. I mean, I was a clinical psychology doctorate trainee and I thought this, I haven't heard this before in the literature. But I kind of just thought, well, it's he's just marketing himself in the wrong way because he didn't really, he didn't express data in any kind of sensible way. Um, he was very much his sort of narrative was, I'm the only person in the world that understands smoking and everybody else is an idiot. So I approached him to say, I'm from the world of the idiots.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I think you're onto something really important here because I did a brief literature search. I did stop smoking. I didn't actually stop just after reading the book. I had already stopped, but I read the book curiously, and because I was curious about what was different. The course I was doing was very cognitive behavioural focused, but the teaching we had on public health and on smoking kind of just didn't make any sense to me. It was very behavioural. It was all about conditioning and habit, and so I did a literature search, discovered that the literature back in the 1990s was still assuming benefits of smoking were real, which, Alan.
By benefits, we don't mean health. Everyone understood it was
No, no, no.
health bad
The
for the lungs.
psychological benefits of smoking relaxes me. Smoking calms me down. Smoking helps me. Smoking is this. Smoking is that.
Right.
The assumption in the psychological models of smoking were that smoking confers genuine benefits on smokers who therefore have impaired concentration, decreased ability to cope and function without their cigarettes, and therefore treatment is focused on finding better ways to replace people, to replace those benefits. And I thought this is just ridiculous that in the 1990s there's a tacit assumption in the benefits. This was predated the BMJ article of 2014, but even then it was clear. that smoking didn't help. That there was some literature that said, oh, look, smokers um, cope better than non-smokers, but actually they didn't look at non-smokers. When I actually dug into that particular paper that was cited repeatedly, they were looking at withdrawing smokers. So they got smokers and then gave half of them cigarettes and half of them not weren't allowed their cigarettes, and then compared them on cognitive function tests. And not surprisingly, the withdrawing smokers who were tearing their hair out and climbing the walls didn't do so well. So like, see, smoking's really helpful for concentration. Anyway, so I
God.
approached Alan Carr and assumed that I would do my PhD on his approach, compare it to the best available treatments in the NHS at the time, which was a consultant-led 8-week very behavioural program with NRT, nicotine replacement therapy. Publish, and Alan Carr would be brought into the mainstream, and everyone would be happy.
Let me just ask before you go into that. Did you think Alan Carr's book was so radical? It sounds like for you it seemed quite radical at the time. Why was that so radical?
Well, because he was the first person, I mean, he understood smoking so clearly and said it's complete and total nonsense that smoking gives you any benefits. It stresses you out
Right.
and
In
then
fact, the benefits.
partially
Okay.
restores what it's taken away from you. So it's like curing a headache by smacking yourself over the head with a hammer and then saying, look, when you stop hitting yourself over the head with a hammer, hammers are really good for concentration. Um, but then he went a bit further than that. This was the bit that my PhD specifically focused on. I mean, I described it as Alan Carr's cognitive dissonance model of addiction, because that's kind of what it was. Um, I had to turn his book into I suppose psychobabble, psychological language, to make it, a research topic. And what his model is that smoking makes you feel stressed and then gives you some of those benefits back. But the real problem isn't that this slight feeling of anxiety, slight restoration of peace of mind, slight feeling of anxiety, slight restoration, because that's quite subtle. What far worse was the fact that smokers themselves didn't understand that that's what was happening. So they observed that they're doing something that's killing them and costing them an absolute fortune, and that they are so miserable without, and yet there's no real reason. They just couldn't understand why they needed to do something so desperately that felt like it didn't really do anything. Because that's the big paradox of nicotine. It doesn't do anything. It's not like those drugs that have, obvious mind and mood altering effects. And I'm sure we can name plenty of drugs that have very clear effects on mind and mood, good and bad, but more pleasurable and less pleasurable. But nicotine doesn't. Nicotine doesn't do anything, and yet people are desperate to have it. And so he came up with this idea that the kind of dissonance, I mean, he calls it the smoker schizophrenia, I think. But the I don't understand my behavior, therefore I have to find an explanation for my behavior. And the explanation lies in giving cigarettes and vapes these qualities that they absolutely don't deserve to have. And then believing that becomes true and real for you. And therefore, the biggest barrier to quitting is believing that you're giving up something that is phenomenally beneficial to you when it isn't. So that was the bit that was radical. Not just that, smoking causes stress and partially relieves it. They were understanding that it was probably more negative reinforcement than positive reinforcement, and so on. It was the extra layer of smokers need to justify their own behavior to themselves. So they come up with all sorts of reasons for why they continue to smoke in the face of overwhelmingly appalling costs. And the greater the costs, the greater the belief in the benefits. And so the distorted beliefs always catch up. So, when you're quite young and you think, oh, well, I enjoy smoking. Yeah, it's bad for me, but I quite enjoy it, so I'll keep doing it. Later on, it's like, well, I'm not really enjoying this, but I need it. And then later on, it's like when you're dragging your drip stand outside hospital, after you've just had half your lung removed, it's like, I can't live without it. So you go from pleasure to need to necessity to I can't live without it in the course of a smoking career. And so it was his dissonance model. That was the radical bit. That's what I wanted to examine in my PhD. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, interesting. You kind of tease that out as a cognitive model. One of the things I would hear again and again, I've worked with a lot of smokers over time. I got involved after I trained as a hypnotherapist with Donald Robertson. I then immediately did his smoking cessation masterclass, which was a 1-day one, very focused on cognitive model and undermining that whole model there, but also motivation and coping skills for relapse. So, I took that, totally got it, but then spent about a long time diving into all the research and building out my own kind of approach for working with smokers. Then worked with about 400 smokers individually, not groups, not in a study like you. And it's interesting. You hear a lot of people talk about Alan Carr, read the Alan Carr, stopped. Then I started again about 2 years later, and I got the Alan Carr book again, and I read it, and it worked for about 2 weeks, and then I started again. Then I read it again, and it's just not working now. So they keep rereading the Alan Carr book like it's going to, like you know. So that was interesting. Was felt like it did flip a switch in their head for a while cognitively, but somehow we hadn't really undermined that belief system. At their core, they somehow still believe that cigarettes help them cope, and that's what it's the relapse question that I think gets really interesting. Why do people relapse if they're no longer addicted? You know,
Yeah, I mean, the Alan Carr approach is, I think, one angle. I think there are other angles. So, I mean, my assumption when I, my not my assumption, my hope when I did the PhD, to directly comparing Alan with the NHS was that his approach would become more mainstream. Because I assumed that he would actually want the credibility of being cited in journals as opposed to, but I realized after, unfortunately, I mean, predictably enough, the outcomes were absolutely nowhere near as good as he said they were, when there was proper controls in place. Because if you're paying 100, 300 odd pounds and it's the name and it's the, you're going to see the guru, all of that was stripped away. It was just two blokes in a room talking to NHS referred smokers. So no one knew who he was. I mean, it wasn't him anyway. But it was the people that do run his clinics for him. He wasn't at that point even in practice anymore. So there were two genuine Alan Carr therapists who came, but they were just, I'm not going to say their names in case they're around still. But Bob and Chris, they were just Bob and Chris, and then the NHS guy was just Fred or whatever. And so there was strip away the name, strip away the facilities, and it's just this is a person in a room. So someone saying I'm unfamiliar with Alan Carr. Good point, actually. I should really contextualize this. He was a man who wrote a book saying the easy way to stop smoking, which became a multi-million bestseller. But his whole narrative was, I am the only person in the world that understands smoking, and nobody else does understand it. And I had some sympathy for that perspective when he was the only person saying this, really. But what happened in the research was that, both groups did it equally well, actually. The NHS consultant did pretty well. And
that was intensive behavioral counselling.
intensive behavioral counselling, nicotine replacement therapy, relaxation exercises, distraction techniques, lots of accountability, small goals.
Kind of David Marks. I don't know if you know the David Marks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't, I don't know, the guy that ran it had his own protocol. He was a sort of
Okay.
NHS consultant who had been interested in addictions and public health for some time. And, he got reasonable relapse, he got reasonable quit rates. He got higher relapse rates than Alan did, than the Carr method did. The Carr method was just 2 sessions, nothing else except for smoking doesn't do anything for you. And I think that's where the book falls down, because that's the only thing the book says as well. He says it very persuasively, lots and lots of times. And he's right. And people go, you're right. That's incredible. I've seen the light, and they abandon smoking. But you do also have ritualistic aspects, the culture, the classical conditioning of, a smoke with things. And if you don't understand, and also this kind of residual idea that somehow you won't get rehooked again if you stopped easily. And I think one of the problems with the cognitive switch method, as you can call it,
Yeah.
is that people quit a lot more easily. They just kind of think, oh yeah, this is a waste of time, and they've been all their cigarettes, and they feel, but that ironically makes relapse more likely, because people go, well, it wasn't that hard anyway.
Oh,
I hope it's no
yes.
big
So
deal.
there's that. And I mean, they can,
Whereas if you have
there's
to kind
that.
of sweat
And then
your
they've
way
got,
through a month of,
there are the two, what I would regard as the two relapse points. One, the sort of, let's say 6 week period afterwards,
Hmm.
where they're going through all the withdrawal symptoms, and they're still getting triggered a bit in situations, but they're coping with it, or maybe not. Sometimes it just doesn't. But then we're talking 2 years later, stressful situation. This
Yeah.
happens at work and that, and suddenly they're with somebody offering a cigarette, and or the idea comes up, I'll have it. In other words, there's a kind of, I don't want to use the word kind of emotional belief, but there is kind of an emotional, nearly physiological belief that
Yeah.
this is going to help in this situation. And that hasn't been
Yes.
undermined properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's one of the strengths of of the cognitive approach, the approach that I now use mostly actually, is to say if you quit believing that you're giving up benefits for the sake of your health, you will carry on believing in those benefits. You're depriving yourself of something that you think you want and need because you need to be for your health. And so you might, through willpower, through, finding new things to embrace, sport, health,
Mm.
be able to quit for some months or even a couple of years. But if you'll carry on believing that smoking did help you, it's just something that you're not letting yourself do anymore. So you've given up something genuinely useful to you in your life, and at times of stress and vulnerability, you're vulnerable to going back to that again. Whereas if you give up thinking, I am so glad to be shot of this, that adds to all of my stresses, that makes my life more difficult in every way, and I am delighted to be rid of it, then you are less likely to relapse, I
So
would
let's
say.
come back to that because basically you're driving kind of the cognitive switch that Alan Carr gets people into, but undermining the whole thing much more thoroughly there. Yeah.
Yes, and giving people kind of a more of a grounded understanding. Like it's not people need to have tools and strategies to get through those vulnerability periods. So I don't dismiss the behavioral stuff. I don't dismiss using NRT temporarily. I don't dismiss using relaxation exercises and coping and avoiding high trigger situations and things like that. Alan would say all of that is wrong. You should, if you're avoiding high situation, you're just reinforcing the concept of deprivation. And if you're substituting with, nice treats or chewing gum or something like that, then you're just reminding yourself you're not smoking. And I think that was his view, but it wasn't evidenced. There's plenty
Yeah.
of evidence that behavioral strategies work alongside that switch. So yeah, cognitively you believe, yes, I want to be free of it, but you've still got to get there. You've got to get beyond that point of those first few days. And it seems to me pretty sensible to avoid big parties and pubs and big celebrations
Don't
where you
don't
associated
don't try and
cigarettes
give up
strongly.
smoking just as you're heading off to Glastonbury for the
Well,
weekend.
exactly. I mean, yeah, pick your moment. I mean, obviously not long term. You tell people you don't have to give this stuff up to long term, but
Yeah.
to start with, don't go on a diet on Christmas Eve.
So now let's find out. So what was that? That's why you wanted to do that. What were the research results? What was that like? How big was the study?
Let me have a look. So here's my book.
Oh,
It was literally 20 years, 25, 28 years ago. Um, I I can't even remember. Let me put it in the notes afterwards. How
don't
many
worry,
people?
don't
There were
worry,
a
don't
couple of
worry.
hundred. The statistical enough people for meaningful statistical analysis. So a couple of hundred in each group, I think.
Wow, that's a
Um,
bit. That's powerful numbers. Yeah,
so
you're
yeah, we had enough
not
numbers for
talking
meaningful analysis.
16 in each group. You're talking a
Yeah, no,
couple
no,
of
no.
hundreds. Yeah.
There was decent numbers.
Wow.
And the quit rates were broadly comparable across the groups. Um, so there was, I mean, Carr did slightly better longer term because there were slightly more relapses in the other group, but it was not statistically significant. So if you scaled it up a bit with those numbers, you might get to significance with a few extra people, but it wasn't statistically significantly different. What was different, I mean, I also looked at predictors of cessation, and the only thing that reliably predicted cessation in any of the groups was the degree of cognitive change. Nothing else predicted cessation
So
except
let's
for
just unpack that a little bit. Not quite so much. So the degree of cognitive change means what predicted was
Okay, so there was in the 90s still being used, and as far as I know, it may well still be being used, a questionnaire called by someone called Tompkins called the Reasons for Smoking Questionnaire. The idea being you give people reasons for smoking questionnaire, they tell you all the reasons they smoke, and then you go, okay, you do it for something to do with your hands. We'll give you a fidget toy or whatever they called them back in the day. You like the social aspects. We'll coach you on social behaviors without smoking, and so on and so forth. The assumption that these benefits were real was absolutely implicit in the questionnaire. It was these are the benefits of smoking. People need to replace these benefits in other ways, and so that's what the. So I just basically changed the title of the questionnaire to beliefs about smoking questionnaire, and then gave it to people. And
brilliant.
the
Love that.
question was simply the degree to which people scored differently post treatment on the beliefs about smoking questionnaire. And interestingly, even in the behavioral group that didn't talk about cognitive stuff much at all, there was quite a significant shift in reason in the beliefs and the benefits.
So you must have already formed this hypothesis that belief change was needed before
Yes,
you.
that was
Yeah.
what Alan Carr taught. It was like, well, so his approach basically is these
Okay, so
beliefs are
you unpack that
nonsense.
as a belief change model and then
So
said,
yeah, so I mean,
okay,
the
I got it. I got it.
introduction was
Interesting.
quite clear about these are the current models of smoking. None of them are adequate to express smoking. I mean, like that. I wrote. I've just reread them tonight, thinking how bad were they? They were rubbish. I mean, they were just all so basic and so they just didn't explain smoking. None of them did. Neither
That
the
smoking
benefits.
helped people relax, that smoking helped people concentrate.
Yeah, it's like, smoking helps me relax, but you're still going to smoke when half your lungs been removed. Is that relaxing? The idea that you need it's just it made no sense. That the level of the level of distress and anxiety that smoking caused people, that the idea that something as flimsy as, well, I like having something to do with my hands, like, chop them off then, because you're chopping other bits of your body off,
I know. I mean,
Um,
we had somebody take the training some while back. She was a nurse, and she said they had somebody come out that they'd had to have a cancer of the throat,
tracheostomy.
and then
Yeah.
had to have a tracheotomy basically because but as soon as they could, they wanted somebody to hold the cigarette over here so they could breathe in through here. I mean,
Yeah.
what level of kind of need and belief and I think fear actually is generating
Yeah.
that.
Well, I
It is
have
just
heard.
it's just extraordinary.
And someone's just popped up a very interesting question, or not a question, but point. People say, oh, it'll never happen to me. That's true, but again, that's not really explained in the psychological literature, because it's like the money doesn't count. It's as if smoking money is monopoly money. The 20 quid that you spend on cigarettes doesn't count. Like foreign holiday money doesn't count. It's different money. Smokers are no more generous and freely splashing cash all over the place than any other people. It's just that money for cigarettes doesn't count. Money isn't everything. It'll never happen to me. Well, why won't it ever happen to you? People who have already been diagnosed carry on smoking. People who already are pregnant carry on smoking. People who've seen loved ones die carry on smoking. So, so yeah, and then somebody else is saying addiction. Yes, the addiction model is there, but the nicotine withdrawal is mild. Like it's not the same as heroin, where you're,
Cold turkey,
wall to
yeah.
wall vomiting, and it's
Yeah.
and even it's nicotine addiction isn't particularly strong. So this is where the cognitive dissonance model was needed, because it's like there has to be some way of explaining why a drug that doesn't really lead to any appreciable withdrawal symptoms. I mean, withdrawal symptoms are real. It is absolutely addictive, but doesn't give you any benefits. Withdrawal is really mild. It's deadly, self-evidently deadly, and yet, people can't stop. So yeah, anyway.
And it smells disgusting, and it costs you loads of money, and well,
Yeah.
and then we'll look at the
The models weren't
psychological.
adequate. The
Yeah.
models weren't. I think that the dissonance model makes a lot of sense, made a lot of sense to me at the time. And then I continued. I actually then took Carr's model after I'd finished published, I then pulled together, I started running smoking groups for the NHS. I ran stop smoking services in Stockport for about 3 years and did a
Wow.
research trial then, which blended everything. It was like, okay, what worked well in the behavioural groups, what worked well in the car groups, put them all together, come up with a protocol. And that's essentially what I did. And then that's what I do now, still with a few tweaks along the way. And someone said, can we talk about vaping now, please? And it's like, yes, this
Yes,
was.
we will.
So
We need to lay the ground. Did Alan Carr use any hypno? Because people say what really worked in the car was that actually they did some hypnosis in the middle of the Alan Carr
not at
therapists.
my groups, he didn't.
Interesting, interesting. So was that on your radar at all as you went through? I mean, all the
No.
smoking cessation, it wasn't on your radar to look at hypnotherapy, despite, I mean, quite a lot of
No, no.
obviously
I was
claimed
looking at
efficacy,
Car versus NHS, and
and that was it.
neither of them used hypnotherapy.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, and of course, this we can talk about this a little bit later, whether hypnotherapy on its own or in its different varieties would be effective for smoking, and some of the studies like the Cochrane review that was done on that, which had a big impact on whether it was going to get rolled out in the NHS as well, I think. So, well, let's dive into the whole issue here of everyone would begin to decide, right, smoking is really, really bad. And we had the nicotine replacement therapy, which kind of like, did that really work? We can talk about the research into that, but let's not right now. But I don't think it works that well. My read of the research, when you look at 4-year rates afterwards, then somebody came up with the idea of let's deliver nicotine in a kind of cigarette format without the bad smoke, right? Called
Hmm.
vaping. So
Genius.
talk to me about your involvement with how that when the government started to who came up with a vaping idea, and
China.
how did it get introduced? I mean, we got the gun,
Uh,
we've got the.
vaping was originated in China. I think they were called ciglets or ciclets or something like that. No, cigalikes. They were called cigalikes. Um, so look-alike cigarettes, and they came in menthol, tobacco, and plain flavors. And they were designed to be a way of helping smokers stop smoking. So at that point, there was already the Nicorette inhalator on the market, which was an inhalable nicotine form of nicotine. The difference between a vape and something like the inhalator, well, two differences. One is that the vape delivered nicotine much, much more quickly and at far higher in concentrations than the inhalator did. Um,
Hmm.
but the biggest difference was that vapes were sold as a consumer product, and nicotine replacement therapy is sold as a medicine. And so NRT has always been very tightly regulated. Flavors, branding, packaging, points of sale, very, very tightly regulated as a medicine, as it should be, because it's a highly dangerous, addictive product, which is useful for people who are trying to stop smoking to a point. Vapes, on the other hand, were sold as a consumer product. And so they were first available in the UK in around 2006, online only from China. Very niche product, bought basically by smokers, I think, desperate to quit, and then appeared on the high street for the first time in 2008. And they appeared on the high street because it's a consumer product, and they appeared mainly in head shops, because they were this cool counterculture type product. So, not surprisingly, they were immediately of interest to young people. Um, and by 2010, the flavors, which had just been originally with the cigalikes, had just been tobacco, menthol, and plain, exploded into, tropical and fruity and sweet. And then from 2010 onwards, very specifically, cynically marketed towards children. So there were flavors like bubblegum, canned toffee apple, gummy bear, just appalling. Um, Only now, finally, is the question of whether they should restrict the number of flavors that you're allowed to create a vape out of. So you can't make candy floss vapes and, gummy bear flavored vapes,
How come
sour
that it
cream.
got through as a consumer product when it had
I have
actually
no
an addictive
idea.
substance in it?
I have no idea. It still is a consumer product. No one's looking at changing that. It's available all over the place. So there are specialist vape shops. So if you look in a vape shop store, it's brightly coloured. I mean, it's heavily marketed to be appealing. A wide range of flavours, funky colours, funky flavours, sold in, available on the high street. It was only recently restricted to to 18s and 18 and overs. I mean, beforehand, anyone could buy them. In
So
some countries in the world.
when did it sort of become official government policy and you were, I think, trying to make a noise and say this isn't such a good idea?
Well, it was never. I mean, I don't know. I kind of left the world of smoking between 2010 and 2020 mainly, as I just sort of lost interest. I mean, I'd been doing it since for about 10 years by then, and I've got a lot of interest. I do a lot of things, so I was very much involved in CAMS and crisis care and looked after children and all of that at that point. So I became aware of it because I was still talking about smoking at that point. And vaping, I was being asked about what do you think about vaping? And I was like, well, it's obviously a terrible idea. What? And then I realized that that's not what other people were saying. I was seeing just on the news, people being interviewed, not by me, but by other health professionals saying, aren't you concerned about vaping? And the government line, um, whether this was official policy or not, but it was certainly what was being said on the radio, because I remember, and on the television when people were being asked about it,
Hmm.
was that there was no evidence that anyone apart from smokers trying to quit were ever using vapes. That there was no evidence at all. And I literally remember shouting, "Not yet!" But so this must have been back in 2008, 2009, because by 2010, already by then, it was very obviously people were taking it up. And now 25% of 11 to 15-year-olds have vaped. So if you want to know the scale of the problem, 25, one in four children, secondary school children, not even sixth form, but secondary age children have vaped. We're talking millions and millions of children worldwide. And of course, there's all the adults and young adults as well. But yeah, the government policy was the government line or public health line was always there's no evidence that anyone takes up vaping. It took a very long time for them to start saying, there's a bit of an issue with children taking up vaping now, although they still haven't done anything about it, other than they brought in an age restriction some time ago. I think January 21 or something. I mean, very years too
Mm.
late, decades too late. But they still haven't restricted point of sale and or flavors. They're looking at flavors now.
And we're
Um,
talking about two. I mean, obviously there is a health reduction issue with vaping versus smoking and
yeah,
breathing and all that stuff into your lungs. But we're not saying there are completely minimal health issues around breathing, around vaping. I mean, there are two.
yeah,
So there are two. We've got breathing the smoke into your lungs, and you got the nicotine going in that route. Versus vaping, you got the nicotine going in that route,
yes,
and you've got this other stuff going into your lungs, which certainly
yeah,
isn't as bad. But we
no.
know there are some health problems with the vaping vapor, and then we can talk about the harm or why nobody perceives any harm in people getting addicted to nicotine, which is just like
Yeah, I mean
insane.
that is the thing that drives me. So as far as I can, I mean, I haven't spoken to anyone from public health, but from looking at the NHS guidance, the official NHS Better Health type sites, and how to quit smoking sites that are NHS run, and looking at what ASH say, they are they say that vaping is a very effective way of stopping smoking. So I take issue with the language being used there. I'm not denying that vaping is far better. If you're going to be a nicotine addict, it is better to vape than it is to smoke. Tar and carbon monoxide are the big killers with smoking. They are not part of vapes. So, and there has been a significant reduction in health harm as a result of vaping. So I am happy that as a harm reduction option, vaping is better than smoking if you are going to vape. But in the old
You're going to
days,
take in nicotine, yeah. If you're going to take in
if you're going
nicotine,
to take in nicotine, sorry, if you're going
yeah,
to take in nicotine, if you are going to be an addict, it is better to be a vaping addict than to be a smoker.
yeah.
You've frozen, so I don't know if that means I've
No, no,
frozen.
you had frozen, but it's all right. We're back on now.
We're back on, okay. Yeah, so as a harm reduction product, yes, it is better to vape than to smoke. As far as we know for now. I mean, remember, nobody has smoked for longer than 15 years. Nobody has vaped, rather, for longer than 15 years. I don't know how many decades it took for smoking health harms to become apparent.
Yeah, well, that's
I
interesting.
don't know quite why people are quite so complacent about this, enormous experiment being done on the nation's health. Because
Fingers
aerosols
crossed,
contain,
fingers crossed it's going to be okay.
fingers crossed, we don't know. Um, we know that aerosols contain things that are, all sorts of unpleasant substances. Acetylcholine, I think, is one of them. There's diacetyl. I think benzene. There's things that are in car exhausts, things that are in paint strippers, things that are known
It's hard
carcinogens.
not to imagine that there are
There's
some aren't some cancer-causing compounds
yeah,
in what you're breathing into your lungs when you're vaping, but maybe they've really excluded all of that. But I don't think there's any control, just like with cigarettes, there is no control on what people put into cigarettes, right? There's no control on the additives they add, which to
yeah.
tobacco, which is shocking. I don't think there's any controls on what they put into vapes, is there?
There is one substance that's banned in the UK but available elsewhere. I think that is diacetyl, which is associated with popcorn lung, which has caused serious health harms in young people very rapidly. So that's been banned. So yeah, there's stuff in there that's not nice. There are known health risks that are beginning to emerge, heart health issues, carcinogens, and so on. I think, I don't know. I think it's extremely complacent to just say it's healthier than smoking, so don't worry about it. We don't know.
So one we've got
Um,
if you're smoking already, it's better to move to vaping, and yes, we'd agree,
yeah.
but there are some problems with that. On the other hand, we've got people also who are picking up some of those ideas and thinking, okay, so it's okay to vape then.
Yes, there's a lot of assumptions that vaping is harmless. That is definitely not the case. I mean, to be fair to the NHS guidance, it says vaping is not harmless. Don't vape if you don't smoke already. So the bit that I think where I think the advice is muddle-headed is that it's based on a very simple assumption, which is one vape is better than one cigarette. So if you're going to if you're going to switch to vaping, that's better. Now, back in the old days, people did use NRT, and a small number of people got hooked on NRT, but
That's nicotine replacement
nicotine
therapy.
replacement
Yeah,
therapy, sorry.
yeah. That's
There was
okay.
an assumption, and you would always ask the question when you're assessing a person how they're doing, whether they're still using the NRT, because it was just completely assumed when you used nicotine replacement therapies to quit smoking that that was temporary, that you were replacing, that you were basically changing your habits and your behaviors, but you were still getting some nicotine so that you were able to, work on, you were able to get over the smoking
Wean yourself
habit,
off. Yeah, yeah.
wean yourself off gradually with a bit of help as you went along, and then wean yourself off nicotine replacement therapies. With vaping, there is no such assumption. It is clearly when they say quitting smoking, what they mean is switching to vaping. So when they say on the NHS website, the most effective way to stop smoking is to vape, what they don't mean, the best way to stop nicotine is to vape and then stop vaping at
Yeah.
some point in the future. They just mean switch, which is, if you're going to mean that, say that. Say that vaping is better, switch from smoking to vaping.
Yeah, they
But they
don't
talk
say
about
because your
quitting
nicotine,
smoking.
you would come in and they'd assess you and they give you this level of dose nicotine replacement therapy, and then
Yeah,
the idea was it would come down to this, and
yeah,
then down to this, and then you're off. And of course, you haven't got all this ritual stuff going on
yeah,
and all of that. It's a different. Oh, I'm going to stick a thing on my arm or chew some weird gum. So there's that going on, but they haven't got that dose reduction plan. It's not a controlled dose reduction plan.
no,
And also, you're keeping all of the same ritualistic behavior and associations and triggers.
yeah,
And I think the key thing is the speed of the dose delivery into the brain. And I think that's the key thing because my reading of the research was one of the things tobacco companies they realized that the speed with which they can get the nicotine into the brain is going to make people more hooked. And they focused on additives, maybe I'm wrong on this, to cigarettes that increase the speed in which nicotine enter the bloodstream and cross the blood-brain barrier,
yes,
right? And so, and here you've got vaping, which is doing exactly the same thing, just as fast, maybe even
yes.
faster. So
Well,
they're
yeah, I
getting a
mean, the
hit. They're
original
getting
vapes
a
didn't
hit.
do that. The original vapes had were called free-base nicotine, so it took longer. But they changed that. You're absolutely right. That one of the things was the speed with which nicotine hits the brain. So they now use salt-based nicotine in vapes as well as in cigarettes, which means that the nicotine delivery system is just as fast as it was with cigarettes.
So they get a
So
really,
that's
like a really fast, big
yeah, it's
hit.
the
Yeah.
same as because the inhaled nicotine through smoking used to be quicker than vapes, but they changed that years ago with for vapes, where they now use this new technology in the vape to make sure that the nicotine hit is just as fast as it is for cigarettes, which again is very different to nicotine replacement therapies where it was a slower release.
It was much slower. You stick the thing on here. It's
Yeah,
like, oh, something happening? Not yet. And I think the other thing that's really worth bearing in mind with this is when you're smoking, here's a cigarette. How much nicotine is going in is something you're kind of used to estimating, so to speak. And of course, it's got a cost associated with it, and can't do it over here because it smells bad and all of that. And when you're taking the nicotine replacement therapy, you know the dose and amount of gum you're chewing. Had a few
yeah.
people who were addicted to NRT over the years, but very, very few. But with vaping, people have no idea how much nicotine they're taking, really. I mean that
No, and that's the biggest, that's a massive problem because with a cigarette, as you say, well, there's two things. Firstly, there's a limit to how much your body can tolerate a cigarette. There's a limit, a physiological limit to how much tobacco you can inhale before you throw up. You have to, it takes several years, decades to get to very high levels of consumption because of the toxins in cigarettes. With nicotine, it's vapor. It doesn't have the same physiological effect on the body. So young children can get into it much, much more quickly and can start taking in large amounts of nicotine in a way that would take years and years and years for a smoker to get up to.
it tastes good and doesn't make you cough, right?
Exactly. Tastes good, doesn't make you throw up. Bonus. But the other thing is, as you say, that a cigarette, you stub it out. There is a natural end point for every cigarette, and then before you have another one, you have to reach into your pocket, take out the cigarette packet, take out the fag, light it again. So there are built-in breaks. It is extremely rare to have someone literally train smoking where they light a cigarette with the
It
stub
is.
out
It
the
is
old one. It has
very,
happened,
very,
but
very
that's
rare. Yeah.
very rare. Um, Vaping, if you're out on a night out and you've got a vape in your hand, you just puff all evening without any kind of natural stopping point, natural break, which means you can. intake take in so much more nicotine through vaping at younger ages than you could through cigarettes, which is a big problem. So, and the other big problem is that there is increasing evidence, and again, no one's doing this research. I've been trawling for it, looking for it. So one thing I've been looking for is how many people who've switched from cigarettes to vapes quit. I've spent years trying to find this. The answer is we don't know because they're not looking at that. They're looking at quit. When they talk about quit rates, they just mean have they stopped smoking, not have they stopped nicotine use. So my guess would be that the majority of those people who have quit using vapes are actually they've just switched. So then I started looking at, okay, how many people quit vaping? And quit vaping, the quit rates for vaping are broadly equivalent to quit rates for smoking, but the quit rates for people who've used both are worse. So if you are a smoker who's gone to vaping and then tried to quit, you're less likely to get completely free than if you just quit from smoking or just quit from vaping.
Huh.
Um, so yes, it's health harm reduction, but it's also increasing your likelihood of staying addicted for longer.
Well, but I mean, I think that's the interesting question, though, isn't it? Because then I think the assumption is, yeah, but so what? The nicotine addiction. So, I mean, I think then we have to dive into what are then the actual genuine harms, and we've talked about the potential harms of the vaping vapor in your lungs, and and we may see some real problems after 20 years or 25 years. What happens with that? We have all the second issue, which is people getting huge doses of nicotine and then going back to smoking. So I had a case, I'll share my case on this. A guy helped him stop smoking, 20 a day, stopped smoking completely, saw him like 18 months, 2 years later. He said, I goes, I stopped completely. And then I took up vaping, and it's he's head of the company as well, but he can vape in his office. It seems okay. And so he's vaping all over the place and seemed fine to him. Forgotten what he'd supposed to have learnt with me. And then one night he's out there and somebody gives him a cigarette outside the pub and he's like, oh, wow, that's even better. Because of course it brings back all the ritualistic feeling and associations. And then he's back seeing me and he's on 40 a day now because he was so much more nicotine addicted. So there's
Yeah,
that problem. And I think you've
I've
got a
had
story
exactly the
about that,
same
haven't you?
last
Yeah.
week. A smoker who came to me, she smoked, she quit, she switched to vaping. She then decided she didn't like vaping very much. She wanted to go back to smoking and realized she needed way more cigarettes than she used to before she went smoking. And that brings us on to another other problem with the advice to switch to vaping is that many people, and again, it's very hard to get data, but the plenty of studies that I've found say it's some say many, some say most, so over 50% of smokers who vape also occasionally smoke. So they're dual users. They're not vapors or smokers, they're dual users. And another
So
set of emerging,
vaping becomes the socially accepted part that they can do
yeah, they
here
smoke
and
at
here.
home or where they're outside, and then they vape at the office. They vape indoors where they're not allowed to smoke. So they now smoke on special occasions or whatever. But there's again emerging evidence from credible journals that are saying that the health harms from dual use are worse than smoking alone, even if you're smoking less overall. So again, it's like that the advice to vape is based on such shaky assumptions with research in all sorts of different areas, from the problem of dual use, the problem of switching back and being on a higher level than before, the problem of reducing the likelihood that you're ever going to get off nicotine completely. All of this is coming out if you go looking for it. But and I think that I think all of the advice will change in the next decade.
Well, and we
People will
haven't we
become
haven't
more
talked
obvious.
about what you and I consider to be the real harm with
Yeah, and
nicotine.
that's not even getting on to
Let's
the
get on to
real
that in a second.
problem.
Let's get it. So, why is nicotine? I mean, we can talk about why nicotine is so addictive, but one of the things that I read about, and I read, and then I probably need to verify. I'd like to find more sources, but maybe is that within a week of people starting to smoke, often as teenagers, the number of what are called nicotinic receptors. We've actually named these receptors that seem to be such nice fits for nicotine, which I don't think is a usual substance in people's environment. And so why they're called nicotinic receptors, I don't know. But the number of nicotinic receptors triples, grows 300% within a week of people starting to smoke. I never tell people I'm trying to help stop smoking that
No,
particular
don't
fact
even
because
know.
that doesn't encourage them to make it. It's
No.
not as difficult as you think. You just got to go for it. Oh my God, I've got 300% more. So, but I don't know. Is that true? Have you come across that bit of research as well that nicotinic receptors?
Yes, and also a study again. I mean, this is going back in the 90s. It's an old study and it's on smoking, but there was a big study looking at the how quickly children or young people get addicted, and
Yes.
it takes something. The study was that 90% of people who smoke three or more cigarettes in their life, three or more cigarettes in a space of a couple of months, will smoke for life. So three cigarettes gets you hooked.
Wow.
Um,
Well, perhaps this gives us a segue into. I do remember that little bit of data that showed the modification in the beliefs around smoking in teenagers. I'm not sure if I've got my data spot on here, but that basically, compared to non-smokers, within, again, I can't remember, it was a few weeks, teenagers had their belief that smoking helped them relax had like massively increased compared. So before they smoked, they thought no, smoking helps. This many thought smoking helped me relax. After they started smoking, this many thought smoking helped them relax. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? That
yeah,
they start smoking, because we know smoking doesn't make you relax. Smoking is it triggers the stress response, the fight or flight response. In fact, it's what we call technically. I'll get this right for you, Chrissy. Here, sympathetomimetic. It
yep, I can't say that.
artificially stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, the stress response system, and so people's heart rates go up when they smoke, they sweat, and we can. That's just 100% established, right?
Yeah. Yes, that is established, and they've also looked at cortisol release, and that increases when you smoke or take in nicotine. Um, so yeah, all your fight flight pathways, all your all that all gets revved up when you have a cigarette. It does not make you relax. Take a non-smoker and give them a cigarette, they will be more stressed at the end of it.
And
But from
yet,
the direct effects of nicotine on the nervous system.
and I don't think we've got yet a really cool explanation quite for why people don't perceive that when they have a cigarette, they actually perceive that it's actually they're getting this chilled out feeling and all this slightly, I'm going to call it unsettled feeling that generally drives them to have a cigarette is temporarily gone.
I think if you look at the etiology of smoking, I mean, I did look at the etiology of smoking as part of when I was doing my research, and people don't start smoking to relax.
No,
That's something that comes in much
comes in
later.
later.
They
Yes.
can't, they, I mean, with smoking, it was never for any reason other than to look good in front of their friends because there's not a single person on the planet that smells a cigarette as a non-smoker and thinks, oh yeah, that looks really good. So when they get what they, that kind of slight buzz, actually, that's probably dwarfed by the fact that they're also feeling dizzy and slightly sick because it's they're not used to nicotine. They're so nicotine naive that you get a bit of a what they a head rush, and they would go, "Oh yeah, I'm really feeling the rush," as if that's a good thing. And then of course that disappears because that's really, really, really short-lived at the beginning of a smoking career. And then after that, this is where the dissonance model makes more sense because you never liked it. You didn't like your first one. You didn't like your 10th one. You don't like your 1000th one. You never liked it. I mean, it's slightly different for vaping because that's at least that's neutral. Cigarettes were actively unpleasant. And anyone that remembers their first cigarette clearly will remember it being actively unpleasant because it just is. It's disgusting. It's a horrible thing to do in the way that inhaling smoke from a barbecue or being trapped in a burning, it's unpleasant. So you experience this unpleasant thing that you're doing to impress the people around you, because that's the only reason anyone ever takes it up is peer pressure or curiosity or wanting to be grown up because daddy smokes or whatever. Um, and then you find yourself wanting it. So it's like this urge to, I want a cigarette, but I hate these things. Like, why would I do that? I mean, it's all saying masochism. Well, it feels, you'd think, wouldn't you? But no, people develop, they have to come up with some reason for why they like it. So suddenly it's like, well, yeah, it tastes disgusting, but it relaxes me or helps me focus or it helps me concentrate or it warms me up or it cools me. I mean, I used to literally think, oh, have a cigarette because it warms me up. It doesn't warm me up. I'm cold in my flat and I'm poor, I'm a student, I'll smoke to warm up. It doesn't warm you up. It causes vasoconstriction. It makes you colder. But let's not let reality get in the way of a good excuse to satisfy that I want a cigarette, I want a cigarette, I want a cigarette voice.
Well, I always portray it as people feeling slightly unsettled because of the
Yeah,
last cigarette, and then,
yeah,
and they do feel settled when they have a cigarette. It seems.
exactly. That's a really good way of putting it. They have a hunger for something that they don't understand. They just know they want it. They know that they feel better after they've had it. And it makes no sense because it doesn't taste nice. It's not fun to do. It makes you cough. It's expensive. It stinks.
But there is
But you
something
have
at
to
that
do it.
moment, and at that moment of delivery, and for whatever 2, 3, 4 minutes afterwards, where all that agitation
Yeah.
has gone. And I'm not sure exactly that is the dopamine, maybe. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but there is that effect that it seems
It is
to.
the quietening that down. I mean, I use the externalizing approach that is quite popular because I was a child and adolescent mental health, but I was a CAMS psychologist for many
Yeah.
years. And externalization is a way where you give the problem a character. You give it a name and you describe it and you draw it out. You might make it out of Play-Doh and you'd say, okay, so tell me how this operates. And you can start seeing how these processes will work. So it's not you kind of getting confused, but you're just being confuddled by. So I use nicotine itch as my character. And nicotine itch stands for niche. Niche is the little character. Nicotine itch. Itch is irritating, time consuming, controlling, and horrible. And he stresses you out because he's like, feed me, feed me, feed me. And while he's hassling you, you can't settle to anything else because he's just making you irritable, anxious, and on edge. But also, he has propaganda. He just tells you nonsense all the time about how much your life would be completely terrible without him. And it's the belief in the propaganda that, I mean, the propaganda is given credibility by the reality of that process. You have you do have that factor, but only because you're climbing the walls beforehand. So then that smoke finally it all calms down, and that feels
You're giving
really,
that
really good.
essentially a very that calming down, a very cognitive rather than any sort of neurophysiological from the dopamine sort of aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably. I think you are probably you're withdrawing from nicotine, so you are.
Okay, so the delivery of the nicotine withdrawal
I think it's right.
symptoms
If
is
someone's
what you're
saying it's the
looking
deep breathing that calms down, I think it's partly that, but they have tried. I mean, they thought when they realized nicotine was addictive way back in the 60s, they're like, oh, brilliant. Okay, well, let's have a nicotine-free cigarette, and then people can have all the pleasure and the social aspects and the ritualistic and the deep breaths. But yeah, complete commercial failure because cigarette without nicotine in it is totally pointless. So the
at.
deep breathing without the
And the deep
nicotine, it
breathing
doesn't
isn't, and
doesn't cut it.
well, yeah, and as I take people through my particular tension release breathing protocol in like 20 minutes. They come out of it and I go, "Do you feel like having a cigarette?" They go, "I don't even feel like lifting up my arm. I mean, I'm just
Yeah, I mean, deep breathing is good, but I don't think that's
in a
why
very
that.
specific, yeah. Well, my
I don't
point,
think it's the deep breathing. I think, unless I misunderstood the comment, I think that someone
yeah,
was commenting that the actual action of taking the deep
deep
breath
breathing,
in
yeah, yeah.
was the thing. And I think that might be part of it, but not all of it.
Yeah, people look, there's a lot of components to it, and certainly people
Yeah.
might be breathing in a little bit more deeply, but so,
Well,
but
but
let's
also
come back to the, go on.
you have all the ritual. I mean, you have your whole post work cigarette routine. Your comfy chair and your music and your cup of tea and your favorite seat, and then you sit down and you take in a big breath, and it's like, yes,
Yes, and this signifies this is the break in my day. This signifies
yeah,
the break in my day.
yeah.
But let's talk about what I think you and I consider to be probably the real harms, apart from getting people hooked back into tobacco smoking at a stronger level. The What are the problems with nicotine itself? Why should we be concerned about nicotine itself? If we could deliver nicotine without any risks to the lungs, and people were enjoying it, should we be concerned?
Yes. Psychologically, yes, because it's a stressor. I mean, it's known that it has these direct effects on the nervous system. It stresses you out. But actually, life as an addict is stressful anyway. So um, there are direct stresses in that it stresses you out because it acts on the fight flight system. There's indirect stresses because you are withdrawing from nicotine almost all the time. So even if you're vaping regularly, in between the minute put your vape down, you begin to withdraw. And as soon as you begin to withdraw, your stress levels and your mood stress levels increase and your mood drops, and you begin to get that restless, hungry. There's a nicotine shaped hole in your life that has been completely artificially created that never used to exist, and you feel incomplete without your nicotine. So all through your day, you're lacking something that has become a need,
So your heart
which is a
rate's
stressful way
your
to live.
heart rate's 9 beats per minute faster. You're
Yeah,
stressed the whole day. You've
yeah,
got this hole in your life that you keep trying to fill.
yeah.
And
And you have to manage the addiction. So you have to make sure you don't run out. You have to spend money on it. You have to, if you're somewhere that you can't use, then you have to either find a way, which is stressful. You have to zero a vape in a hospital toilet. you know, that kind of mechanism of vaping without the vapor escaping, which is apparently unpleasant. I've never vaped, but vapors tell me how deeply unpleasant an experience that is. Searching through dead vapes in your, and burnt coil taste suddenly spitting into your mouth because you're desperately trying to find a hit off a dead one. Um, yeah, plane journeys. It is three reasons why life is far, far worse as a nicotine addict. One is that it's a direct stressor through sympathetico-mimetic effects. Yay! I said it. Two, the indirect stresses of nicotine withdrawal. Three, the stress of having to manage a habit for your whole life. And I would actually add four, self-concept.
yeah, well,
You are someone that can't function without an artificial crutch to get
well,
you through every
and
problem in your life.
let's unpack that because I think that's one of the biggest ones. And in
Yeah.
terms of the impact on kind of fundamentally, we could use the word confidence, but really the technical word we would say is self-efficacy and ability to self-regulate. So the person's ability to self-regulate has been completely kidnapped by nicotine. So they don't feel they can self-regulate without nicotine, which undermines their confidence. But the nicotine also makes them more stressed. It increases their need to self-regulate, but it kidnaps their ability to self-regulate. So they feel psychologically impoverished in terms of their ability to cope with stressful
Yeah.
situations, especially without nicotine, even with nicotine. But without nicotine, they feel really,
Yes. And one of the biggest concerns I have as a child and adolescent mental health
yeah,
psychologist, and there is research backing this up as well, is that children who vape, and there are many of them, um, um, have poorer coping strategies than children who don't vape, and that
yeah.
there is direct effects. We talked about nicotine effects on the heart rate. There are direct effects of nicotine on the brain, on learning, on impulsivity, on memory, on retention. So, and also on resilience and coping. So you take children at primary school, I've said already, 1 in 4, 25% of 11 to 15-year-olds have tried to vape. 10% of them describe themselves as vaping occasionally or regularly. So that is a very large number of children who are taking this up at a period of their time of life when their brain.
We lost your audio there for a second. Chrissy, we've lost your audio. Like something's No, we're not back there. I don't know. It's like a mic connection's gone there or something.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
no,
not
you're
good.
back now. There
I'm
we go.
back. Sorry about this.
No,
I don't know why my internet connection
that's all
keeps
right.
dropping out. Yeah, so at a period of time in children's lives where um, their brains are immature. They are taking in a substance that impairs learning, impairs cognition, affects impulsivity. And this is a period of life where there's a lot of challenges and stresses and changes anyway. They've transitioned to secondary school. They're having to cope with that whole going from a very nurturing primary environment to a big school with lots of classrooms. They're learning new subjects. They're making friends. Social relationships become very much more complex at that age because it's no longer just that you're friends with me if you all do the same things I do. You have to interact in a social way. Um, and then, adolescence obviously becomes more and more complex. And at a time of their lives where you really need to be developing resilience and coping skills for all of those new challenges, exams and moving towards adult life, children's ability to do that is being dramatically compromised, which I think is a national scandal.
Absolutely, and I think we're laying up a huge problem in the future. And that's not a problem for the NHS mental health services. It's a problem for people's lives, And I think there are so many directions to take this, but this aspect that they're one of the aspects I think, and I want smokers to try and understand, is that smoking fundamentally is making them feel not just unsettled, but a little bit unsafe because they're having a stress response in response to, I don't know what. So they don't know what they're having. So they're going to situations now stressed, which means they're looking for why I'm feeling actually somewhat like ready to run away or do something. So they're going into situations feeling somewhat less settled and safe. Does that make sense? And then they don't have an ability to cope and self-regulate because the thing that's making them unsafe is the thing they're using to just.
Mm.
I'm going to have to let my dog out because she's hold on a second, she's going nuts here. Um
I can't. I know questions have been popping up all the way through. Thank you very much for being so interactive.
yeah,
It's hard
but
to
so sorry,
read them.
Chrissy and I wanted to wanted to die. So let's dive into I mean, I think that great bit of research from the BMJ. I mean, I can try and find it. We can play the video if we want, or we could just summarize it. But basically, that showed quite, I think, definitively that smoking made people anxious and depressed, and that when they stopped smoking, the change in their mood was equivalent to taking antidepressants. And that was a meta-analysis across 13 or
14.
14 different smoking studies, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone wants to look that up, it's BMJ 2014. It's a very, very important study. It should have sent shockwaves around the vaping world because I mean it's about smokers, it's not about vapors because vaping wasn't even really being looked at that point. I can't see any reason why, other than a little bit of health related anxiety, which might be less stressful. I would imagine that if they replicated that study again now with vaping, it would be the same.
Shall I play the video? I do
Yeah, go
have
for
it
it.
here, I think. Hold on. Let's just cue that up. And yeah, because I think Chrissy and I knew this. I think we kind of knew it from our look at it, but this was just like pretty definitive. And the fact that it didn't shift the dial on this, I think is really concerning. Can people see? It's going to take a second to come through. Let's see if that's coming through. Is that playing or not? Can you see that, Chrissy?
I can't see that. Just
Okay.
quickly to answer Sue's question, in the UK, there's some health education. It depends on where the schools buy it in. It's delivered by Ash, who are pretty fairly pro vaping. So it doesn't say what I would say if I was teaching in schools, but at least there's something. Yeah, there is some school-based education.
Okay, here we go. I think we've got this now. Let's see if this plays.
It's very well known how smoking affects physical health and that smoking cessation reduces the risk of developing physical diseases such as cancer and cardiovascular disease. But what's less well known is how smoking cessation affects mental health. So that's what we set out to look at in this study and to see actually what happens to a person's mental health scores after they've quit smoking. In order to answer this question, we did a comprehensive search of online databases to retrieve all studies that had looked at this question. So in particular, we wanted to include studies that had measured a change score. So they've measured mental health at baseline and then mental health after quitting and compared that to people who'd continued to smoke.
We looked into each of these studies and we looked at their outcomes and we categorised the outcomes according to what the measures were designed to assess. So these were things like anxiety, depression, positive affect. And what we found consistently across the board was an association between stopping smoking and improvement in these mental health outcomes. And this consistently favoured the quit group. And to sort of interpret the effect estimates from these outcomes, we compared them to antidepressant treatment for anxiety and depression. And what we found is that our effect estimates were actually equal or greater to that of antidepressant treatment for mood disorders. So it's quite fascinating. One way you could look at it is that actually people felt better and then this prompted them to stop smoking. But actually that's not likely to be true. And this is because most of the studies we included were secondary analyses of randomized control trials of cessation treatments. So in these trials, most people tried to stop smoking. So whatever happened to their mental health happened after they stopped smoking.
We also know that actually our patients do want to give up smoking in line with the rest of the population. Some patients will say to us, oh, well, it helps calm their nerves. But this research shows quite clearly that that simply isn't the case. In fact, when people give up smoking, actually their mental health improves. What we need to think about is how we can raise awareness in mental health professionals. How can we help our patients give up smoking? One of the things that we can actually do, we know there are smoking cessation clinics that we can signpost patients to. Perhaps we should learn how to give very brief advice. Perhaps we should also be prescribing stop smoking medications. And also, I think there's possibly an attitude among mental health professionals that we think perhaps we shouldn't stop our patients smoking because we'd be depriving them of one of their pleasures. But again, there's no real evidence that this is the case at all.
One of the things that we often find when we talk to patients is they'll say, I need to smoke because of my stress, doctor, and it improves my mental health. And it's one of those things that I think we've always found hard to argue with. Well, what we can say now is that it's those episodes of not having smoked for a while that give you that feeling of being moody and irritable and a little bit down in the dumps and anxious that is caused by smoking. And when you stop smoking and have stayed stopped for a while, those episodes will disappear and overall your mental health will improve. So I hope these results will give GPs new confidence that they can tackle smoking in those people who find smoking such a crutch for their mental health. In fact, probably the opposite is true.
So, yeah, pretty clear. Of course, they're working with people already smoking. We're talking now about introducing a very nice, trendy, flavoursome way of delivering nicotine to young people who are now becoming anxious and depressed because of nicotine. Would that be a fair way to look at it?
Well, I think I haven't seen a study that says they're becoming anxious and depressed, but it wouldn't surprise me. I have seen studies that say they are becoming less able to cope. They show poor problem solving, they show greater impulsivity, and they show poorer learning. So it does affect their brains, and it is stressful. So yeah, I mean, nicotine's nicotine, however you get it.
So we need to work with the government on changing their policy. We need to work with health practitioners, both GPs and mental health workers, to really understand, to help people come on. Do you think there are any, I mean, there used to be some concerns about people with depression possibly relapsing when they stopped. It's something I sort of would say, a bit of caution there if they're,
Even with even back in the 90s when I did my literature search, that wasn't really being seen as a credible threat risk. So this was pre the BMJ study, but even then, there were studies that were saying smoking doesn't really reduce people's stress or improve mood, that it's more negative reinforcement around nicotine withdrawal. So I don't think that there's, I mean, I guess it's timing. I wouldn't necessarily suggest someone give up smoking right before an incredibly different, because even though you are less stressed when you've quit, you still have to go through the process of quitting. And that is a period of stress.
and the person doesn't have any, I mean, they don't have any coping techniques for stress. I mean, this is the thing. This is why I undermine the Alan Carr thing was like, yeah, but you've got to give people, that people need to have ways of coping with stress. We all need ways of coping with stress. We have to cope with stress, and smokers have, it's like they're babies at coping with stress. Once you take the nicotine away, they're like, oh, I don't know how to cope with stress.
So I think, I mean, I think the Alan Carr book is great for the cognitive switch side, but I think that it is important to also give people alternative strategies for managing stress. Not because you're saying cigarettes reduce stress, they don't, but because quitting cigarettes or quitting vaping is still stressful. You still have to go through that process. And even if you believe you're giving up something that you need, it's still stressful, even if it's not true. Believing everything.
And this aspect of attacking it, sort of the cognitive belief, but if the kind of, let's talk about if the emotional or physiological belief is there that a cigarette's what I need when I'm stressed, it's a feeling in the body. It's not just it's a whole feeling in the body. We have to undermine that somehow, and we also have to give people, when I'm stressed, I'm going to do this instead. I got different ways, we've all developed which is why we don't reach for cigarettes.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important. And those sort of behavioral strategies are really important. Things like urge surfing, understanding cravings, being able to breathe through them, being able to just use distractions temporarily. I think that, Carr did kind of chuck the baby out of the bathwater when he said everything because the fundamental assumption is wrong with all that behavioral advice, that smoking confers these benefits, therefore we need to teach people to get these benefits in different ways. That is fundamentally a misperception of how smoking operates. But nevertheless, when people give up something that they have experienced as helpful, they need something else that they're going to experience as helpful to take its place. And they need to build these resiliences in. So yeah, and I think any kind of smoking cessation protocol does have to include coping and resilience and problem solving and stress management during the process of withdrawal. But it's time limited. So it's not people who quit with the sense that, I love this, it's my crutch, it's my relaxation. It's this thing I really enjoy doing, but I have to give up for my health, for my family, because I can't afford it anymore. Then you give up with a sense of deprivation and loss, and that might never go.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many weeks you've been a non-smoker for, you'll still remember with this kind of rosy glow of memory. Oh, now my coffee is never quite the same, and my post-work cigarette, my post-work ritual is never the same, because you'll just have these memories of feeling so good with a cigarette in your hand or a vape. Whereas if you actually do the cognitive work alongside all the behavioral work, it's a time-limited period of stress where you do have to exercise willpower and you do have to be committed and motivated and very up for it. And that's where I would be concerned about if someone's significantly depressed, significantly anxious, you need to give them something first, sort of treat their depression, at least to a degree first, to get them to a point where they can give a quit attempt a proper effort. Because if people quit, it's a bit like the kind of cycle of change. You go from contemplation to pre-contemplation. You go from thinking about it to preparing to acting to relapsing, and then you go back to pre-contemplation where you don't want to think about it anymore, because it takes quite a lot of psychological energy and you get to make a quit attempt, and then to fail in a quit attempt, you don't want to think about it for a while. You go back into, it's fine, I enjoy it, I'm not going to think about this now. So you don't want a quit attempt to be half-hearted. You don't want it to be, sabotage because someone is going into it a period of their life when they're really, really anxious and stressed, and they just don't have the resilience and the self-efficacy and the kind of grit to get through withdrawal and to really give it the mental focus and energy and effort it requires.
Well, I think it comes down to this aspect of self-efficacy. And so, I think, as you know, the approach that I focus on is increasing motivation. But in part of increasing, the critical part of increasing motivation is undermining the reasons in terms of that cognitive change. That then all these reasons for stopping smoking and then realizing it's useless. But then the second thing is then coping strategies, being able to cope with the feelings that come up, and because there will be some probably, and we can call them memories or whatever coming up, and how to cope with that, and having not just having actually rehearsed coping with that in a way. I mean, actually having real coping skills that are kind of embedded somewhat. And I think if you tackle those two things really well, then we're going to look at a much higher degree of success.
Yeah.
But I know you're particularly, but I'm the same. We got to undermine that fundamental belief that smoking does something for me. If we don't tackle that, then people aren't willing to look at what they're doing to their lungs or the different. I know you don't agree with kind of activating that, but once they've realised that smoking is useless,
I think we should name this if we're sort of I think the only point of difference in what we actually do would be the level to which you focus on health harms compared to how I focus on health harms. My view has always, I mean, I might be wrong. It's a research question. We should set it up and do it as a research work. But my belief is that the more scared you are that you can't stop and that it's killing you, the more anxious you become, and the more anxious you become, the less you're going to be able to engage with the process. You'd rather just go back into denial. And there was a really interesting study about the level of belief in the harms of smoking for among smokers who had never quit before compared to smokers who had tried to quit and failed. So 40% of smokers who have never quit before completely accept that smoking, all the kind of health of it, when it first emerged, in the 80s or 70s, the Brown and Williamson documents and all the kind of health harms, when it became talked about much more and it penetrated the kind of collective consciousness of the public that smoking is deadly. They did some research on smokers' beliefs in those health messages, and 40% of smokers who had never tried to quit believed in those health messages, but only 10% of smokers who had tried to quit but failed believed in those messages. Because, it's scary to believe those messages.
It is. I'm destroying my body and I can't control it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you've got some three things are present there. Here's health information, the knowledge of you're a smoker, and the level of belief you have in that health information. If you're a smoker that's never quit and you still think, well, I'll quit one day, you can go, okay, well, I'm a smoker, but I'll quit. So here's some health information. I can believe that because I'm going to quit. Take away the quitting belief. Suddenly you've got, I'm a smoker. Here's this health information. I can't stop. And then suddenly it's like, oh, no, that's bollocks. What do they know?
Because
they say everything gives you cancer these days. Rubbish, load of nonsense. Doctors all smoke like a chimney anyway. And so I don't want to trigger people when I'm treating them into that la state of mind.
No,
I want to keep them
I totally agree with
and
that.
optimistic and positive. So I kind of just skate over. And when I feel like I've got them, it's become like, and an additional benefit is, hey, guess what? You're not going to die anymore. That's good, isn't it?
Well, I always make sure we frame that and say, we're going to come back. We're going to give you the coping skills. Do not worry about this. We're going to focus on, we've got to get your motivation at fever pitch. Let's really face this now. Feel it, get it into your, not just cognitively here, but like, let's have your body really experience that these are poisons. Yeah. And then we're going to help you protect your body, because we're going to teach you the coping skills and make you strong.
I can see it could work very, very well. I just can see the danger of triggering.
No, I see it. No, I think
maybe you're very skilled at avoiding triggering that.
I think you have to get that set up so that they're open, that they're ready and open to look at this, because we're going to do this together. We're going to get through this together. The more you look at this, the more you're going to never, ever go back to it, because you're really going to see it's such a toxic love affair that you're in. That's my characterization. I want to get into the emotions of it. This is a toxic love affair. It's like you got a lover who is screwing you around, ruining your health, undermining your confidence, making you smell disgusting, ripping up. How much? 45,000 quid you spent on something? This is you spent on this toxic lover who says, you can't live without me. And they're,
Yeah, I can see that being really effective.
Anyway, you have some. We go to town. You've been doing smoking, you're back doing some smoking cessation sessions?
No, I kind of got back into it. So I rewrote the book, thought, oh, let's update it. So the book that I wrote a book back in 2006, and that's been fully updated, published again.
Let's get that book up for everybody to see here. Give me the title.
Smoke-free, vape-free easily, or more easily, I should say, maybe, but that didn't trip off the tongue quite so well. So, yeah.
Here it is at Amazon, everybody. And it is now, it wasn't available before. I think it's just come up now for availability on Amazon. Maybe I'm wrong about that. So there is the book. So you wrote the book. Do you think people can stop just by reading this book?
When the original book was published in 2006, I got quite a lot of letters from people that stopped. So, it says 2006. That's because this is an update. So it's now saying 2006. This has only been out a couple of weeks. So when I wrote the original book, which is called, what's it called? Free Yourself from Smoking. I got quite a lot of letters from people saying I quit, and quite a lot of Amazon reviews saying I've quit. So, I think some people can quit just from reading a book.
Just from reading the book.
So I rewrote it mainly to include vaping, because vaping is the new problem.
Yeah, no, and I think it's so important that that people doing smoking cessation work feel confident working, know how to work with, and confident working with vapors, and that we can also give people self-help information by which they can break the habit too. So fantastic. So and you've been then doing some sessions on this. You've been doing, when you do smoking cessation sessions, do you do 6 sessions? Do you do a single
I
2 hour
do
session? Do you
3.
lock them in a room for 24 hours with cigarettes and make them just desensitize them?
At the moment, well, I mean, it slightly varies because but I've got my standard protocol is 3 sessions.
Okay.
So, well, there's the original, the kind of free of charge discovery call that's kind of 15 minutes, which is just, okay, do you want to stop? And that's to assess, are you ready for this? Do you want to do this? What's your commitment like? So that's kind of standard, I guess, for any kind of person that might want to come for hypnotherapy. You meet them first and just kind of clarify that what they want is within your sphere of competence, and that you think that hypnotherapy is a good fit for what they're after. And it's not just hypnotherapy; it's cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy. So then session 1 is I take them through a psychoeducation. Well, I mean, I do an assessment. I assess motivation and commitment, self-efficacy. I take them through some psychoeducation. I have a PowerPoint presentation because it just feels much easier to actually go through slides. So I go through slides with them. I basically say it doesn't do anything for you. I elicit what they think it does for them first, and then I say, yeah, no, that's not, no, that's true. And that's an interesting conversation. It's very Socratic. It's, what makes you think that this is, and then they are already, they know it, they're on shaky ground. They're like, yeah, I tell myself this and I believe this, but it's probably wrong, isn't it? So then I get them to the point at the end of that session where, are you ready to set a quit date? The answer ideally is always yes, because like otherwise, because session 2 is quit date. So I do hypnotherapy, a hypnotherapy script at the end of session 1, which is a general ego strengthening. I can set goals, and I'm going to set this goal and confidence, and I give people a whole load of written resources that they read, homework, which is self-monitoring. I teach them about habit, because the whole classical, we haven't even talked about classical conditioning. Pavlov's dogs, if you pair a cigarette, the unconditioned stimulus with relaxation, coffee and sex and dinners out and pub gardens and holidays. You pair those together enough times, then the vape takes on the qualities of the genuine pleasure of the situation. And so people fear losing that, which they will feel a loss, because they are like salivating at the thought of their cigarette. But I just teach them that as when they broke the link between the completely irrelevant thing that's part of this pleasure, the association fades. And so all the pleasures return in as much as they ever were, and the association with cigarettes just disappears, or vapes just disappears. So that's just kind of, so I give them a whole load of written resources, and then the instruction, the homework is that they need to read it, they need to do those tapes, the downloads I send them, the hypnotherapy script, and smoke as normal or vape as normal, but change in terms of amount, but self-monitor. So how are you feeling? What is that feeling like when you need a cigarette? Is it a good feeling? Do you know what I mean? Imagine if you think, oh, I love this, I'm getting all excited. Imagine that somebody took your cigarettes away from you at this moment in time. Suddenly you realize your cigarette packet was empty, or all the cigarettes are wet and you can't light them. That good feeling is going to transform instantly into, because unfortunately, in terms of the self-monitoring, a lot of people say, oh yeah, I discovered I really love that feeling of about to light a cigarette. But that's only because they're about to relieve the stress. You can do a thought experiment that goes, okay, at that moment your cigarettes disintegrate. You haven't got them anymore then. And also smoke functionally. Smoking, you're simply servicing a habit. So smoke standing up, don't smoke in your special chair, don't pair smoking with anything else, just smoke or vape at the back door, looking at a boring view. Don't smoke looking over Canary Wharf on your balcony, feeling cosmopolitan. Smoke looking at the bins, feeling a bit bored that you have to do this because you have this need. And then session 2, the protocol is quit date. So we do the 2 futures and a motivation and commitment script, and then they quit. They throw away all their smoking materials. They have already done that before the session, ideally, but if they haven't, then they do. And then session 3 is relapse prevention. And if they are still smoking when they come back for session 3, then it's
how to cope with this.
Troubleshooting, resetting, figuring out what went wrong. But relapse prevention, things like thought stopping, mental rehearsal of high risk situations, all that kind of stuff.
Urge surfing and things like that.
And
So
then if they haven't quit, then each subsequent session can then just be, you could just book additional sessions, but there's a fixed fee for the block of 3. Because you don't want, if you have one session and they have to pay again to come back, they're not going to come back.
yeah.
So it's a block of
That's interesting.
3
That's
at a
interesting.
fixed fee, and then additional sessions as needed.
Well, you know, I do
How
it
do
a
you do it?
2 hour or 2.5 hour single session generally, unless I've done an assessment and think we need to split this into 2 because they're not quite confident enough in their own ability to cope. We need to build some coping skills there. But no, and I can see that way of building them up to it. That's good too. But there has to be this line in the sand.
Yeah, they have to book their second session within 2 weeks of the first. Otherwise, they have to have the first session again.
Really? Okay.
They have to pay for another.
The third set of the set and that second session is their quit session.
Yeah, the second session is the quit session.
Yeah.
And it has to be within 2 weeks of the first session. So we discussed that at the discovery call. So we need to book in 2 sessions that are going to be ideally, you know, at least 3 days apart, because I want people to, when we talked about it, I want them to have plan. I want them to plan it, you know, have a visual jar that they put all the money in that they're saving. So it's really kind of, you know,
Yeah. All
that kind of stuff. And I want them to have read the material. I want them to have practiced self-monitoring for a bit. So I don't want the sessions like a day apart. You know, I Monday and Friday, or Friday and then Monday is good. But 3 or 4 days minimum, and then maximum 2 weeks. If for whatever reason they don't quite feel ready, then they just pay for an additional standard hypnotherapy session at my standard fee to get them back to the okay, set a quit date. So the upfront chunk is assessment, quit date, follow up. You know, because I kind of want them to have the full package. I don't want them to just dabble. It's like if you're gonna quit.
No, you got to go
do
for
it
it
properly with the full package. But if you need additional support, then you know you could just book in as many sessions as you want for additional support. But the actual block is this.
So you know, there's a lot of stuff hanging around. The central focus though for you is undermining the reasons. Yeah. So you know, and having them see that you do that in the first session. Do you repeat that in the second session? Do you give them in the hypnosis recording they're listening to? Are you reinforcing that idea as well that they're starting to see?
Yes.
With every cigarette, you become more aware that, you know, it's doing nothing for you.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I've got the downloads are on my website. So if you buy the book, you get the code to get the downloads. And the only reason I'm not making them completely available for anyone is because they wouldn't make any sense because I go on about niche, you know, my little, this is niche.
We've got we've got your slides, haven't we?
So yeah, I talk about for the motivation and commitment script, it's all as well as saying she's got the book, but she hasn't. Scroll down on the buy the book page, and you'll find all the. I will share screen. Can I share screen?
Yeah.
Keep talking, Mark. I'm going to try and find my.
Okay. I'm looking. Here's a. Suella says, "How would you plan a case around smoking and vaping, please?" That's a big question. We've been dropping lots of hints in here. I mean, my feeling is it's a deal. Smokers are not easy to work with. You know, when you've really got how to do it. That's why I do say take the smoking cessation workshop, because we're covering a lot of ground. So I don't think it's just easy enough to say that here. How would you plan a case around? But we've given a lot of ideas there in terms of increasing motivation, increasing coping skills. That's the main thing in a way. But increasing motivation means undermining the reasons for smoking, and that means people understanding that smoking makes them stressed. It doesn't relax them. So
Can people see this?
Yeah, there we go. We can see that. Lovely.
So if you scroll down, you'll get to to buy the book. Actually, I'll just go back into. I need to change this and say cognitive behavioural hypnotherapy. I apologise, Mark.
Please.
If you don't have, if you haven't bought, you just get. If you scroll down, Suella, whoever bought the book, you get the download the hypnotherapy scripts, and you click access scripts, and you type in the password. And when you typed in the password, you get your relaxation techniques, body scan, imaginal tension release, breathe, cue controlled relaxation. Then you've got a couple of meditations because I like meditation. I have a daily meditation practice. So, and then you have the much more clear smoking related ones. This wouldn't make any sense whatsoever if you haven't read the book or come to me as a client. because it specifically talks about the kind of nicotine trick, the misperception, the niche, and then two features, and then the relapse prevention, thought stopping, relapse prevention scripts. So I don't know why you couldn't find that. So whoever it was that said they couldn't see
Yeah.
it, but
Yeah.
scroll down, you should be able to find it.
You have to buy the book to get the password.
Yeah, you do. But I
You
mean,
do have to buy
as I
the
said,
book.
not because I'm being all proprietary, but because it wouldn't make any sense if you haven't read the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Yeah.
The scripts are specific to this particular, the metaphors that I'm using in the book and the narrative approach that I use, which is this niche, externalizing niche person.
So, I mean, I think, you could probably buy the book, get the downloads, and you could probably figure out your approach there. Anyway, that if you manage to do it from that, think I think that no particular clients probably undermine hypnotherapists' confidence more than smokers. I've met so many hypnotherapists whose confidence has been really damaged by trying to work with smokers when they don't know how to work with them. Because if you don't understand how to undermine this stuff and how to work on these factors, they are very tricky. And, you look through the history, Dave Ellman saying he got no idea how to work with smokers, this incredible hypnotist, no idea how to work with them, couldn't help them. And it's been a mystery. I mean, how to treat smokers has been a complete mystery, right? And even the tobacco industry itself confesses there's something called Nesbitt's paradox, which the tobacco industry, I looked at some internal documents in tobacco industry. Nesbitt's paradox is this paradox that people say smoking relaxes them, but we know it doesn't, but they believe it does. So that's called Nesbitt's paradox. It's well known in the tobacco industry, and unless you really understand how to undermine that and the ways to undermine that, you're going to struggle, I would say.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, much as I'd love to say, yeah, read my book and develop your own program, I think you have to really, really, really understand the mind of a smoker to unpick the mind of a smoker. So I think if you're going to use a behavioural approach, you can just set that up as a I'll answer that question in a second. Sorry, I get distracted and I start reading through them.
Yeah, no, it's very hard to do. Multitasking is a lie.
Multitasking. The real problem with it's not just understanding it conceptually yourself. It's being able to communicate, understanding it well enough to communicate it to somebody who is not only not agreeing with you, but actually finding it difficult to hear what you're saying. It's Socratic. Socratic questioning in CBT and cognitive therapy is a real skill. It is covered in the course, but it takes a lot of experience and practice to be able to share. Psychoeducation, socializing someone to a model, I guess is what I'm talking about. Socializing somebody to a new way of thinking about something, whether it's depression or anxiety or anything else. But particularly smoking, where people are so wedded to their smoking, to their beliefs. It's like trying to undermine someone's belief in a political party or something.
I know, absolutely.
And really, really hard.
Let's go through how much they try to hypnotize you into their own. I mean, they will try and hypnotize you into their own reasons, right? I mean, they come up, as I said, the first person I worked with, this was when I was just doing it look, this is how nuts I am. I decided to launch as a hypnotherapist doing smoking cessation. That's what I like. So I started, that's what I did. I just thought, well, let's do the proper stuff. So I built my program. Then I soft launched and sent message rounds to all these people saying, I've just built this thing. It's going to cost 250 quid when it's launched, but now it's just 50 quid while I'm just testing it out. Do you know anybody? So the first person I worked with was supposed to be like a 2-hour session. It was 3.5 hours. And she got every reason under the sun as to why to keep smoking. But the one I remember best was, it's the only way I can bond with my mother-in-law. And I was like, and I had to be on my feet thinking, that's just not true, is it? I mean, you've got to be so on your feet because they're going to give you all this stuff, the reasons why, and you think, oh, you poor thing, I shouldn't take that away. No, it's rubbish. It's rubbish.
I mean, it's, my GP says I have to smoke. My GP says I have to smoke. So a couple of questions have come up, and I've only read half of them, so I'll need to go through all of the questions after. Somebody said about how do I protect myself against contraindications? I don't know specifically contraindications for smoking. I am insured, obviously, like everybody has to be for working with anybody against any kind of. But what I'm doing is an evidence-based, well-researched protocol for smoking cessation. So as far as I'm concerned, I am covered anyway. I'm not doing anything weird and wacky. I'm using cognitive behavioural therapy. That's a well-established approach combined with hypnotherapy. That's another well-established approach, just packaged in a particularly, I personally find quite useful and effective way. So I think if somebody, I don't know what contraindication you might mean, but somebody reports that my treatment made their depression worse or something, I guess all of us could say, anybody could say that we made them worse in some way, and that's what I guess insurance is for. I have never had anyone experience. I mean, I've treated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands of smokers in the NHS over 4 years. I mean, I was doing it week in, week out for years. And that was, GP referral, delivering pretty much the same protocol I'm delivering now, which was then researched. So I've also even got a research paper that says that this was evaluated and proven to be effective. So I think I'm fair, nobody had ever raised a concern about contraindication as a result of the treatment. So plenty of people didn't stop, obviously.
So,
But
so
sorry,
you're worrying too much. Whoever's asking that question,
yeah.
basically.
I know somebody else had said somebody's read a book that I've read, or someone said something about, but I didn't see the rest of the question, so I'll go back to the someone suggested something in a book that I've read or has, I don't know. But I will go back and read the question because I do want to answer people's questions.
I'm having a look through them, and I think we have covered quite a lot of them actually. Lindsay's let's see. Lindsay says here, someone I think Krissie, can't remember the name, suggests in their smoking cessation book that the smoker should carry around all their smoking paraphernalia in the initial weeks of giving up, so they don't feel any denial. They can make the choice in any moment either to smoke or not. Also, with this, perhaps they won't be in the situation months later of someone offering them a cigarette and them not being able to say no. That's just like 5 minutes of assertiveness training. Honestly, they would have to build up their self-efficacy. Would you ever recommend this idea, Krissie?
No, I don't think. I think if I was helping an alcoholic stop drinking, I wouldn't suggest they have vodka under their bed for initially. I think you're kind of making life harder for yourself.
But out for wine, to have wine instead. No,
I just think you're making life harder for yourself. No, so I think that the initial phase of withdrawal and getting through, you have to. It's hard. You will have nicotine itch pecking your head all day long. It is incredibly, cravings hit. They generally last about 2 minutes. If you have to go and buy a packet of cigarettes, by the time you get to the shop, you won't need them anymore. Same principle for self-harming, actually. Cravings hit, urges hit. And one of the most effective treatments for any form of impulsive behavior like that is reduce access to means. Because if you have to take a bit of time to get access to means, then by the time you have sourced your means, you no longer have the urge to anything like the degree you did have. So I believe in buying time to thinking time, changing your mind time. So no, I wouldn't recommend that. I don't know. I can see the value of it later as a kind of proving that you don't need it anymore. And sort of, but so I can see that it might be useful before you put yourself in a situation where people are going to offer you cigarettes all the time, that you have your own, that you're ignoring. I wouldn't necessarily suggest that. I'm just trying to think, like I'm trying to find positives in the approach.
The main thing
that's that a packet of cigarette that I'm kind of defiance. You've got a packet of cigarettes, sits on your mantelpiece, and you stick your fingers up at it every day.
Yeah, but that's so. Let's talk about assertiveness, because this is fundamentally what it's about here, is being assertive enough when other people offer you a cigarette to say, no, I don't take those fucking things anymore, or whatever it is. You want to say it with some feeling, I think, or just like, no. And but also what I talk about is intrapersonal assertiveness, being assertive with yourself. We're always talking to ourselves.
Yes.
And so and you'll characterize that as Nitch talking to you, and then, well, be assertive back. Say, so rehearsing that, as Mike and Bam would say, essentially that self-talk, that self-instruction. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's so important, because part of the problem is going to be that if you don't do that, if somebody offers you a cigarette, you want one. So you're going to answer in a way, in the addictions literature, what they call seemingly irrelevant decisions. You happen to find yourself in the right place at the right time, where you just happen to be in a situation where someone's going to offer you something. And then the way you answer the question, like, oh, I've quit. you're just inviting someone to go, oh, just have one.
It's
Oh, well, why
exactly,
not?
exactly.
So, it's absolutely, and you have to do it in your own mind before you can possibly do it out loud to other people, which is a phrase in the addictions literature: never question the decision, and you just have it written in neon letters, NQTD. You are at, and this is one of the things I say in one of the scripts, you are at point of maximum clarity at the point you decide to quit. Because right now you've given it all of the thought, you've spent the last few days really absorbing and focusing and thinking about the role of this in your life, what it adds to your life, what it takes from your life, whether you want it or not. You've decided you don't. And you are at the point of maximum clarity right now as you make that decision. So never ever question it.
Well, and
Because
I think,
later other influences.
but I think, this is, I'm very interested in this aspect of achieving that utter conviction, 100% conviction, and there is a certain absoluteness to that. There is no, you're not, that's it. And I love it because we could talk about William James here and his, when you first have a thought, before any other thought comes in, there's a moment of absoluteness with that thought. So, but that's what we're seeking to achieve, is this sense of complete conviction and absoluteness about this.
Yeah, I mean, with my own experience of smoking, when I quit, I wasn't at that point of absoluteness immediately. It did take 6 to 8 weeks, but with it, by 6 to 8 weeks, I was able to, I mean, I was so happy to not be a smoker anymore that if anything else was going on in my life, I would not have to think this deliberately, but the automatic thought would pop up that says, well, at least I don't bloody smoke anymore. It was like, it was the one thing that was still, no matter what else was going to shit around me, I didn't smoke anymore. And that was good. That was a really good thing. And there hasn't been one quivering tiny second of hesitation ever. Because I am so relieved to be free. Now, that hasn't happened with, other quitting other things. Someone said dieting. Dieting, no, because food's nice. Like
So you have
chocolate
to have
is
some.
nice. Food, I mean, it's not, you can never get to a point where you're just so delighted. You can be really happy that you found a healthy way of eating in a sustainable way long term, because long-term success of dieting is all about eating high satiety foods and managing stress in different ways, and you can be happy that you've found found a healthy way of eating that feels sustainable. But you're always going to have moments where you really just want a pizza, or you just want to gorge chocolate, or because food is genuinely inherently pleasurable, in a way that cigarettes aren't. So no, I don't think it is transferable to dieting. Sadly, you can't just never ever want to have sugar again in your whole life, or because we're biologically programmed to seek out.
So, but this getting to this, there's a word in Sanskrit, as you know, I'm spent quite a lot of time in India, and I do love it. So, and this is, but
talk about that one day, Mark.
Rather than the word faith, there's a word nischara, which means firm conviction. So this is about, we could talk about the spiritual meaning, what the context for that. But I just like that idea, you see, of this. It's this absoluteness, nischara, firm conviction. Like you've got this, not just conviction, but firm conviction, and it's nothing's getting in the way of that. It's just not. It's just what's the can't forgot the words not coming. It's totally resolute. Yeah. And so that's what we have to, unwavering. Yeah, it's what is it that's something you just can't, irresistible, firm conviction. There's nothing going to move it. And that's what we have to, I say, we've got to get the wobble out, and we've got to get to that firm conviction. And so I do a lot of work with them, refusing cigarettes with me. No, just have one. No. And then they go, oh, no, okay, no. And the people that won't actually, are a bit shy and won't actually go for that role enactment with me, I feel they're a little bit more at risk because it's not firm. So I want them going, no, I want a fucking cigarette. Come on, just have one. And, it'll be okay. And I really ramp it up, and they've really got to come back at me really strong. And when they really kind of slap their fist on the table and they really go for it, they can really feel then. I say, how does that feel now? And they go, yeah, I feel it now.
Well, that might link back to that question about, do you keep the cigarettes, a packet of cigarettes on your mantelpiece that you
no, exactly. It's back to that. Yeah, you fuckers. I'm not going to take you,
So, yeah. I probably need to lean into the theatre of it a bit more than this is new to me.
Well, you're
I'm
getting.
very quiet and calm and
Oh, we'll work on
very
that.
persuasive. So I don't do the kind of table thumping, but maybe I need to channel my inner.
Well, I think that's interesting in the in the research literature that it's the you know it seemed to be the one area where therapists actually improved because of course this great thing that basically after people finish training they don't get any better. That's the now that's one of the things. But the one area where they do seem to get better is smoking cessation because it does require a certain confidence. And I think when you're talking about, even though you're not maybe as out there as I might be, there's still, you've got a real confidence in, kind of an unshakable confidence in the method and what you know about it and what you know about the mind of smokers and the way nicotine works. So whatever
Yeah.
happens, you're going to go through that and you can take them through that.
Yeah, I'm not fazed by smokers when they say things like, I mean, I've had, as you said, it's my only pleasure in life. And I'm like, I will just sort of be slightly, what do they call it in motivational interviewing, where you're slightly taking the mick, you kind of
Yeah.
disrespectful, that kind of paradoxical reflection where like, seriously, your only pleasure? Like, well, that's a real problem in its own right. Like, tell me about that.
Yes,
So
yes, yeah.
what else how can we build pleasure into your life? And then they kind of say, well, there is this, I have got this and I have got this and I have got this, and I have got this. Like, right, okay. So then it's like, it's not really your only pleasure, is it? It's when they can kind of roll their own eyes at their own smoking isms, but I call them nicheisms. So I find the externalizing approach really, really effective because you can really attack the beliefs without attacking the person.
Yes, that's
Like
the key
Niche is
thing.
talking
Yeah.
a load of, which is where your metaphor of the toxic lover comes in. You're not attacking the person, you're attacking their narcissistic, draggy lover who
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
trying to wheedle their way back into your affections. Like, hey, we used to have fun. You want me back, don't you? So I mean, that is a form of externalization, but you're just
Yes.
creating
Yeah.
a.
I do it as the toxic
So
lover.
but I just make it very, very visual and very clear that Niche is not your friend. He's a nicotine addict. He needs you to feed him, and he will say anything to you, however extreme and ridiculous, to make you believe him. And you believe him not because you're stupid or gullible, but because that's how it works. And millions of smokers around the world do the same thing, so don't feel bad about it. But equally, don't stay stuck now that you've seen it.
And the tobacco industry has designed the delivery method to get that in there
Absolutely.
really strongly.
And the
Now,
vaping industry has
and
designed
the
it.
vaping industry.
I mean,
Now,
and they've made it child friendly.
super great question from Anita Scanlon, and I think this is one of the challenges. This is a challenge. How do you address the sometimes real result of weight gain after quitting if the client raises this as a good reason? I never usually by the time they come with smoking cessation, my experience, they don't raise that as a good reason to keep smoking. It's just a really big concern they've got. And I think the literature's fairly unanimous on the weight gain issue. So we don't we don't try and focus on it too much because how do you tackle that? Because I think they are likely to put on weight, right?
Um, I think that people put on a small amount of weight to start with. I think it's short term unless they just substitute sweet treats for smoking. And so I do say, look, in the first few weeks, have your fridge full of stuff that you like. And if you want to reach for something that you feel that you need, reach for something you feel that you need. But you've got to sort of shut the door on that very quickly. Well, nicotine withdrawal takes 2 weeks max. So give yourself a break for 2 weeks, have what you want to get you through those 2 weeks and then take control. And I kind of just work on the self-efficacy thing. If you can crack smoking, then you absolutely can crack weight gain.
Well, that's great.
Smoking is the
Yeah.
big, big, big nut.
So, Chrissie,
And the self-efficacy, and
you're not going to make
also,
me a fat non-smoker then. That's what they would say to me.
so actually, and also, once you have stopped smoking, you have all this money and all this time and all this energy and all this feel good. Find a hobby,
Yeah.
I went from being an overweight smoker to an ultra runner. So,
Well. Oh, and one of the great things is just walk more. Yeah.
so, find something else that, I mean, I spoke to, I don't know if, I was on BBC Five, no, one of those local radio stations, and the guy, Charlie, somebody other, I should remember these names, Charlie Burley, interviewed me. And he said, as we were interviewing, he asked the same question, what about weight gain? And I was like, well, I turned into a ultra. And he said, oh, yeah, actually, I quit smoking and I took up running because I really liked running as a kid. And then I became a sort of smoker and a drinker, and my whole social life revolved around the pub. And then when the pub left, I kind of embraced this whole new persona and this whole new, and actually it wasn't even a new persona, it was going back to the authentic, real persona.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if you're going to give up smoking, then you can embrace all sorts of other exciting things
But I think that brings in
you have confidence and positivity.
two aspects we haven't talked about there, which and we'll touch on, and then we'll wind up. Well, one is, leaning into people's values, and really leaning into that, wanting to be a model for their children, whether it's wanting to be around for their children, but wanting to be a model for their children, that they're a yoga teacher and they smoke, So, really want to lean into their value. This isn't just about stopping smoking. It's about stepping into a whole new phase of greater vitality, much more healthy living, etc. So, and then begin thinking about that and using those after they've stopped hypnosis scripts that they're listening to, really about that health and vitality and movement and energy and yeah.
Embrace new goals.
Embrace
5K or because it's so motivating. As you feel fitter and stronger, take up something life enhancing, and that'll keep weight gain at bay, and if anything, you'll lose weight. I mean, it's very variable because there are plenty of ex-smokers. I mean, smokers as a group are heavier than not smokers long term.
Really, are they? I didn't know that. See, I love picking up. I mean, I thought I knew everything.
I mean, I'm out of date.
I thought I knew everything about smoking. I meet Krissie and she teaches me stuff. It's great.
I mean, I'll check that because that was when I was doing this was 28 years ago. But yeah, as a group, because they're less active, because they're less healthy. So yeah, I mean, it's you can long term. You have more tools at your disposal to manage health and be healthier and fitter as a non-smoker than you are as a smoker.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground here. There's been a lot of actual really detailed information. I mean, I do know quite a lot. I've read quite a lot, but I've also haven't gone in depth as Krissie by any means, and she's also now dived into all the latest stuff again. So for me, this is fantastic. I hope you guys have picked up a lot of tips here, and got some sense of also how to work with this. I do hope somebody is listening from Public Health England here and maybe thinking about some different approaches, perhaps. Talk to us. We're happy to come up with some ideas on that. Anything you want to finish there with, Krissie?
No, that's just I can't believe 2 hours has gone by. It's flown by. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's been really interesting. Thank you very much for getting me back in the world of smoking because I hadn't really done anything with it for about 10 years. I am kind of re-enthused and really want to make a difference in this space because it's just vaping in particular and children vaping in particular. I'm so angry that it's been allowed to happen. And I could hopefully be part of the solution. I mean, I don't think I will. I mean, that sounds a bit grandiose, doesn't it? I do hope that there will be that there might be some shifts in policy on this soon, because it should not be a consumer product. It should not be available in funky flavors, but also the health advice should be at the very least repositioning itself as being this is a harm reduction advice for complete cessation. The complete cessation should be the goal for health grounds, for mental health grounds, health grounds,
sleep improvement. We haven't talked about the impact on sleep of nicotine.
Yeah, but, I think that at the very least, the health advice needs to be made clearer that they are talking about health harm reduction, which is different. It's a bit like in the addiction in the alcohol literature that that if they know when they're talking about health harm reductions and they know when they're talking about quitting, and they're different things. They shouldn't be calling it quitting when they mean switching. I think that's very, very misleading.
What I want is that that study I look at of identical twins, and you can see the one that smoked, the one hasn't.
Oh, yes.
Terms of the stress on their face. It's all in my workshop. I want to see that on vaping because I don't think this whole fact that it ages your skin. I don't think that's to do with the toxins. I think that's to do with the tension and the reduced blood flow that's caused by not the toxins in the smoke, the nicotine. So
may well be. So yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a very, very active research space in the next 10 years. I'm really looking. I mean, I don't have a research department that can look into things. I can't find the papers that I wish that they would look at. So
Well, maybe
particularly
we'll make a list of like stuff that people should
rates.
look at and see. You know, the great thing is that when people do the training with us, they kind of learn the whole cognitive behavioral hypno-CBT approach. There've been quite a few people, like assistant psychologists, that have then gone on to do research using what we've shown them. You know, so we'll
Well, that would
make
be
a
good.
research
That would
list.
be fantastic if there could be
We'll
some.
make a research list, and we're going to get more assistant psychs and postgrad people just finish their psych degree in, and we'll say, here's a bunch of stuff. If you want some research ideas, here's some cool research ideas that could impact public policy. So, you know,
Yeah, that'd be really
make a
good.
change. Yeah.
So I will to all those who've asked questions that I didn't see as they popped up, or as I will go through all the lists, and I don't know how we're going to answer some of those, Mark. I don't
No,
know.
I don't think there's too many. I had a quick scoot through everything. There's not too much that we haven't answered there. So I do want to say to everybody that I have asked Krissie if she would review our my smoking cessation workshop, and that we would then do something together. She'd update the research, bring in her model as well, see how to get the whole thing together, and we would be launching a new version of that, certainly teaching live online. Maybe even we'll get Krissie down and we'll do it live in London. Let's see, but I'm not sure what the delivery time on that is, but it will be coming out. And if anybody, do not worry. If you don't wait for that, though, if you want to learn the approach, take the workshop now. You'll get it for free when the new version comes around, as ever. So, yeah,
Thank you
enjoy.
very much, everybody.
Pardon?
Thank you much, everybody,
Yeah.
for coming. Thanks,
Yeah.
Mark, for inviting me.
You're so
Might
welcome. I
see
just
you on
love
a
it.
training day one day.
Always talk for ages. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Good night. Sweet
Yeah.
dreams. And don't go and have a cigarette. Just go for a walk and have dinner.
Yeah. Actually, we didn't ask who on this call is a vapor or a smoker.
Oh no, we didn't. Well, we'll let them go now. They can shuffle off and
Yeah, sorry, Carrie, we could talk all night.
we could. All right. Good night. Thank you so
Right,
much,
good night.
Krissie. I really enjoyed that.
Are we not live now? Or are we still live?
No, we're still live. We're still live. We'll go. People are disappearing now, but we can say anyway. That was really cool. Loved it. Loved it. So anyway, let's chat. Let's follow up, and yeah.